If Everett had stopped at my corner that February night, I would have walked half a block through the ice, turned my key in the lock, and stepped into something I was not going to survive. My name is Thelma. I am 63 years old, and this is my true story from Hamilton, Ontario. George died on a Tuesday in March, 16 months before any of this began. We had been married for 31 years. He was an electrician, meticulous in the way that only someone who has touched live wires for a living can be. He checked the smoke detectors twice a year on schedule and always cleared the ice from our front steps before I woke up, even in the winters when his knees were giving him trouble. When the stroke came, it came fast. The doctors told me he likely felt very little. I have spent 16 months trying to believe them. The pension I had built in 31 years as a patient records coordinator at Hamilton General was not enough on its own. Not with the property taxes on our house on Charlton Avenue. Not with the furnace that surrendered in December. Not with being 63 in a city where the cost of existing quietly outpaces what you thought you had saved. My CPP survivor benefit helped. It did not save me. Our son Cole lived in Vancouver. We spoke when we could, but the distance between us was not only kilometers. Grief does something to families. It either draws them together or reveals the space that was already there. Cole and I were still learning which kind we were. When a former colleague mentioned that a private health records management company in the North End was hiring for nights, I told her I was retired. She reminded me, gently, that my furnace had just cost $4,000. I downloaded the application that same afternoon. The company managed archived patient files for a cluster of Ontario hospitals, digitized records, physical documents, chain of custody logs. My job was to cross-reference physical files against their digital entries, flag inconsistencies, and initial corrected records before they returned to storage. Quiet work, careful work. The kind of work I had been doing for 31 years in a different building. My shift ended at 11:30 5 nights a week. The HSR Route 5A ran directly past the facility. For the first 2 weeks, the schedule held. Then the city adjusted the late-night timetable, and the last bus began leaving King and James at 11:05, 25 minutes before I was done. The next departure was 12:40. I was not going to stand at a bus stop alone on King Street in the middle of the night, so I asked the dispatcher whether the bus could occasionally hold a few minutes. Sometimes it could. That was when I first noticed Everett. He drove the 5A Tuesday through Saturday, 50s, broad through the shoulders, quiet in the way that some people are quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they have long since decided to choose. His name was on a laminated card above the fare box. He had a habit of checking his mirrors a fraction of a second longer than strictly required before opening the doors, the way someone does when they have seen something go wrong once and refuse to let it happen again. The first night I boarded, I thanked him for waiting. He said, "Not a problem," and meant it the way very few people mean anything at that hour. By the third week, I had started bringing him coffee. There was a Tim Hortons in the lobby of the records building, and I had taken to buying 2 large double-doubles before my shift. One for me, one left in a paper cup with the lid pressed firm, passed through the partition without ceremony or explanation. The first time, Everett looked at the cup as if he was not certain it was meant for him. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," I told him. "The nights are long." He accepted it with a nod that felt heavier than a simple thank you. After that, he always did. Those 12 minutes became the most connected I felt to another person in any given day. My son called when he could. My neighbor across the street waved from her driveway on weekends. But Everett was the only person who saw me regularly, in real time, in the actual dark of the day. He noticed when I was cold before I said anything. He noticed when I was carrying something I hadn't put down yet. Once, somewhere near Bay Street, he said out of nowhere, "Rough one tonight?" And I realized he had been watching my shoulders in the rearview mirror for blocks. I learned his story the way you learn most things on a late-night bus. In small pieces, offered without pressure, taken without demand. He had spent 22 years as a paramedic with Hamilton Paramedic Services. A call had gone wrong. He described it only once, briefly, and I did not ask him to go back to it. A man had died who, in Everett's judgment, did not have to. He had followed protocol. The investigation agreed. But protocol, he said quietly, and following it and being right, none of those things meant the same as doing enough. He had left the service 6 months after the inquiry closed. Driving the bus paid the bills and kept him moving and gave him something to be on time for, which he seemed to need the way some people need certainty. His daughter Celine lived in Barrie. They had not spoken in 2 years. He said her name only once, and when he did, his hands shifted slightly on the wheel. I recognized that kind of stillness. It was the same stillness I had in my chest whenever someone mentioned George, as though he were still present tense. Neither of us said anything about that. We didn't need to. What I did not know was that Everett had already started paying attention to more than just me. December came, and with it, the first thing at work that made me uneasy. I had been assigned a set of archived billing records, cases from Ontario hospitals that had been flagged during a provincial audit several years earlier and subsequently cleared. My job was simply to confirm that the physical files matched the corresponding digital entries. Routine work, the kind I had done 10,000 times. But on my third night going through those particular boxes, I found something that routine did not explain. A set of treatment authorization forms, originally submitted in 2021, showed provincial approval for a specific cardiac intervention at a hospital in the Hamilton region. The physical form was in the file, signed and stamped, approval code present. The digital entry recorded the same procedure as having been denied, then reclassified under an administrative category that effectively rendered it invisible to follow-up. A denial and an approval are not different readings of the same thing. They are different outcomes with different consequences for different human beings. I flagged it and brought it to my supervisor. She told me that reclassification errors sometimes occurred during the provincial digitization project. To note it and continue. I noted it. I continued. But I pulled the next file and the one after, and by the end of that week, I had documented 14 cases following the same pattern. Different hospitals, different patients, different procedures, cardiac, orthopedic, rehabilitation, all from the same 2-year window. All showing original approvals in the physical record and denials or reclassifications in the system. I brought the full documentation to my supervisor on a Friday. She looked at my notes for longer than I expected. She said she would escalate it. She did not look as comfortable as she had the week before. It was around this same time that I began to notice the car. A silver Civic, older, parked on the far side of Charlton Avenue when I arrived home one night. I noticed it because the street was quiet at that hour and it was not a car I recognized. Hamilton has its neighborhoods and its overnight habits. I did not think much of it the first night. But it was there the second night as well, same spot, and the third. Never any movement inside. Never a light. I mentioned it to Everett on a Tuesday. He asked the color, the model, whether the plates were Ontario. I said I couldn't be sure about the plates from that distance. He nodded and said nothing more until we were nearly at my stop, and then, "I've seen a car matching that on your block twice this week. Same side of the street, past the stop sign." The unease that had been sitting in my chest since the filing room sharpened. I told myself it was nothing. Then, 10 days later, I came home to find the latch on my side gate open. George had installed that latch himself, a 2-step mechanism, specifically because the old one blew open in wind. I told myself the cold had done something to it. I was telling myself a great many things by then. What I could not explain was the folder. I kept a plain manila folder on my kitchen table, a habit I had caught from George, who kept paper records of everything as a matter of professional principle. Inside were my own handwritten notes from work. Not files, not anything I was not permitted to have, just personal reminders. File ranges I'd cross-referenced. Dates. A list of the 14 discrepant cases I'd flagged. Nothing that would mean anything to most people. The folder was gone one morning, not misplaced, gone. I searched the entire house. It had been on that table the night before. I was certain. I told Everett. He did not tell me I was misremembering. He did not tell me not to worry. He said, if anything else in that house is not where you left it, you tell me immediately. The night Everett drove past my corner, a freezing rain warning had been in place since 4 in the afternoon. By 11:30, James Street was a glazed gray-white, and the bus shelters were blurred with mist off the escarpment. I was the only person at the stop outside the facility, standing in the light with my bag over my shoulder and the last of my coffee going cold. Everett's bus came into view at the far end of the block, right on time, headlights soft in the freezing fog. He slowed as he approached, and then he did not stop. The bus rolled past me, continuing south. I stood on the curb and watched the taillights recede through the ice. For one long, cold moment, I thought I had misread the route entirely, that my mind had simply gone sideways from the cold and the late hour. Then the bus pulled over 2 stops further down, hazard lights coming on in the dark like orange pulses, and the door opened. I walked to him on ice. He waited. There was no one else on the bus. The seats ran empty to the back window. I need to show you something, Everett said, and I need you to stay on until we've talked. Something in his voice, not urgency, but weight, the specific weight of a person who has already made a decision and is now carrying it toward its consequence, closed off whatever I had been about to say. All right, I said. He pulled back into traffic and drove. There's a man, he began. He boards about 4 stops after your facility, usually just before midnight. Sits in the back. He's always on his phone. Loud talker. The kind who forgets that other people can hear him. He glanced in the mirror once, then back to the road. I started noting him because he always boards near your building. I said nothing. He talks about his work. Billing records. Provincial compliance contracts. He mentioned, more than once, that someone at the facility had been pulling physical files and comparing them against the digital index. He used the word problem. Everett's voice stayed level. 3 weeks ago, he described the woman doing it. Night shift. Older, takes this bus home. The bus moved through the ice in silence. I didn't put it together immediately, Everett said. Then last Thursday evening, before my shift, I drove past your street. I saw his car, the silver Civic, parked across from your house. Watched him get out. A pause. He walked to your gate. He tried the latch. I heard my own voice, very quiet. He tried the gate. It held. He stood there for a moment, looked at the front of your house, and then went back to his car. He sat there for close to 20 minutes before he drove away. Everett reached beneath the seat and lifted a small spiral notebook, the kind sold at dollar stores for $1.99. I've been writing it all down. Every night I've seen him on this route, the stops he uses. Things I've heard him say. There's enough here. I took the notebook. My hands were steadier than they had any reason to be. We need to go to the police, Everett said. Yes, I said, we do. Hamilton Police Service on King William looked the same at midnight as it did in daylight. Fluorescent and deliberate and accustomed to what people brought through its doors at this hour. A detective met us in a small room and took notes with a pen that scratched audibly on the paper. The sound of someone writing things down carefully because they sense the document will matter. I told my story first, the billing files, the reclassifications, the pattern across 14 cases, the folder, the gate, the car. Saying it aloud organized it in a way my mind had been resisting for weeks. It stopped being a collection of possibly unrelated things and became, word by word, a sequence with direction. Everett read from his notebook, date by date, stop by stop, fragments of overheard conversation set down in his even, methodical handwriting. The detective's expression shifted twice. Once when he described the car on my street, and once when he read the phrase he had written verbatim. Phrase about someone asking too many questions, and about how those questions were going to need to be addressed before they went further. The detective stepped out. She returned with a senior officer who looked at Everett's description and asked him to repeat it once, then placed a photograph on the table. The name printed beneath the photograph was Lionel Garber, 49, Provincial Health Billing Compliance Contractor. I had seen his name on administrative correspondence, He had legitimate contractor access to certain sections of the facility, enough to be present, enough to be familiar, enough that no one would look twice at his being there. The senior officer asked about after-hours access. I told him what I knew. He exchanged a look with the detective that I could not fully read, but did not need to. They kept us there until nearly 3 in the morning. The coffee was poor and I drank 2 cups. When they finally told us they were proceeding with a warrant application, I felt something that was not quite relief. More like the moment when a wind that has been blowing against you for a long time simply stops. The Provincial Fraud Unit's findings took 11 days to compile. What they found in Lionel Garber's home office and in a rented storage unit in Stony Creek filled the better part of a press release and a great deal of subsequent courtroom time. Digitized health records altered retroactively. Billing approvals reclassified as denials. Approval codes replaced with administrative rejections that rerouted provincial payments through numbered accounts held by a numbered company registered at an address that turned out to be a mail depot on Barton Street. He had been doing it, the investigators estimated, for 4 years. 47 confirmed cases across multiple facilities, cardiac procedures, joint replacements, rehabilitation authorizations, people who had been told their coverage was denied due to a classification error, people who had waited and appealed and sometimes run out of time waiting. The detective called me on the 12th morning. She was careful and professional, and she was kind in a way that told me, before she said the name, what the name was going to be. Among the 47 cases, one had drawn particular attention, a treatment authorization submitted by Hamilton General in March of 2022, a specialized cardiac intervention that George's cardiologist had recommended and that OHIP had initially approved. The approval had been retroactively reclassified in the provincial system as administratively denied 6 weeks after submission. By the time George's cardiologist appealed the reclassification and the original approval was reconfirmed, 4 months had passed. George deteriorated in those 4 months. I had always believed the delay was a paperwork error. We had been told it was a paperwork error. I had sat in a hallway outside that cardiology office and watched George fill out appeal forms in his careful electrician's handwriting, and he had looked up once and said, with the patience of a man who had spent his life working around systems and their failures, "These things sort themselves out, Thelma." He had said it the way he said everything, as though the reasonable explanation was always just a little further along. I did not cry when the detective told me. I thanked her and said I would be in touch about any further statement required, and then I put the phone down and sat in the motel room for a long time with the curtains open, looking at the parking lot and the gray February sky above it, and I thought about that corridor and those forms and the way George held his pen. I cried later, back in my own kitchen, several weeks after the trial, with the furnace running and the house quiet. I cried the way you cry when something already open is opened in a different direction. Not deeper, but wider. Lionel Garber was convicted on 21 counts: fraud, forgery, breach of public trust. At sentencing, the judge read the names of the patients whose cases had been confirmed as affected. The judge read them slowly, one at a time, in the particular silence of a courtroom that has decided to bear witness. George's name was among them. Everett sat beside me that day. He did not say anything during the reading of the names. Neither did I. Some silences are not emptiness. They are the only container large enough for what you are holding. 4 months after the sentencing, Everett told me his phone had rung. His daughter Celine had seen the story in The Spectator, a photograph of the facility. A paragraph about the bus driver who had kept a notebook and driven past a woman's stop in a freezing rain warning so that she would not go home alone that night. Celine had called from Barrie. We were sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday, soup on the stove, the low February light coming through the window at the angle it keeps in that season when the sun is still finding its way back. He told me in the same voice he used for everything, but he was very still, both hands wrapped around his mug. She said she'd been thinking about calling for over a year, he said. She didn't know how to start it. And then she read about the notebook, and she thought, if her father was the kind of man who wrote things down for a stranger, maybe he was also the kind of man she could talk to. I put my hand over his for a moment. There are times when warmth is more honest than words. He went to Barrie the following weekend. He came back quieter, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that has set something down, rather than the kind that is still carrying it. Life did not return to what it was before. I have stopped expecting it to. I still work nights. The facility operates under new management and significantly tightened oversight. The provincial digitization protocols that Lionel had exploited were referred for a structural review that, by all accounts, is ongoing. I gave a written statement to the review committee in September. It was the first time I had been in a government building since George's appeal process, and I noticed the symmetry without finding any comfort in it. Some things close in ways that don't feel like endings. What does feel like something is simpler than all of that? Everett still drives the 5A, Tuesday through Saturday. I still board at the stop near the facility. I still bring 2 large double-doubles, one for me, one passed through the partition, without ceremony. He still thanks me in the way that sounds like it means something broader than thanks. Some routines carry the whole of what 2 people have been through together, in a single gesture, and neither person needs to say so. A new woman started on my shift in the autumn, young, working nights because she needed the money and not because she wanted the hours. I recognized the particular tightness she carried in her shoulders, the specific fatigue of someone trying to get through an evening that seems longer than it ought to be. One night near the end of her first week, I brought her a cup of tea from the machine in the break room. She looked at it the way Everett had looked at the first coffee, as if she wasn't quite certain it was meant for her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said, "but the nights are long." She nodded in the way of someone who has not yet been told that being seen is allowed. I think often about the distance between what happened and what could have. If I had kept to myself on that bus, the way cities quietly teach you to. If Everett had stayed in the professional remove that passes for courtesy when you don't want to be involved. If I had never brought him that first cup, and he had never begun to notice me, and he had therefore never begun to notice who else was in the dark on my street. We are told that minding our own business is a form of respect. What I have come to believe is that it can also be a form of disappearance, ordinary, gradual, and almost invisible until the moment it isn't. I gave my night bus driver coffee every week. One night he drove past my stop in a February storm and said, quietly and without drama, that he needed me to stay calm and listen. And because trust had been built 1 cup at a time, in 12-minute rides, in shared silence that asked nothing in return. I listened. That is the only reason I am here to tell this story. Not luck, and not courage, and not the kind of unlikely rescue you read about and think could never find you in your ordinary life. It was attention. 2 people who chose, separately, and for their own reasons, to treat each other as though they were worth noticing. Be kind not because you expect something back. Be kind because attention is not weakness, and because listening, real listening, the kind that costs something, can change what happens next. You may never know whose ordinary evening you have quietly rewritten simply by choosing to be present. What lesson did you take from this story? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments.